The sun peeked through the kitchen window as Rose sipped her morning coffee, gazing proudly at her backyard garden. She was just an ordinary woman with simple dreams who had worked 2 jobs for nearly 15 years to buy this little house on Maple Street. Nothing fancy, just a cozy 2-bedroom with the perfect backyard for what had become her passion, gardening. "Come on, buddy," she called to her brown rescue dog, who perked up his ears and trotted over. Rose had found him at the shelter 3 years ago, skinny and nervous. Now he was her constant companion, following her from room to room as if afraid she might disappear. At 48, Rose's life had settled into a comfortable routine. Weekdays she worked at the local library, helping people find books and running reading programs for neighborhood kids. But weekends, those belonged to her garden. She'd spent countless hours turning what had once been a patchy lawn into a little piece of heaven. Tomato plants lined the back fence, their green fruits slowly ripening in the summer heat. Zucchinis sprawled nearby, and her prize-winning sunflowers stood tall like friendly giants overlooking the yard. "Mrs. Chen says your cucumbers are the best she's ever tasted," Rose's friend Tanya had told her last week at their monthly book club. Rose had blushed with pride. She shared her harvest with neighbors, leaving little baskets of vegetables on porches with handwritten notes. The neighborhood had always been peaceful. Old Mr. Wilson walked his ancient beagle every morning at exactly 7:30. The Patel family's twins practiced basketball in their driveway after school. Mrs. Chen, in her 80s now, would wave from her porch where she sat watching the world go by. They weren't just neighbors, they were a community. Everyone respected each other's space and property. That all changed 6 months ago when the house next door sold. "I heard they're from the city," Mrs. Chen had said, peering through her curtains as the moving truck arrived. A family with 2 teenagers. At first, Rose was excited to have new neighbors. She'd baked her special banana bread and walked over to introduce herself once they'd settled in. The husband, Mike, seemed nice enough, shaking her hand with a genuine smile. The teenage kids barely looked up from their phones, which Rose understood. Moving was tough at that age. But then she met Liz, the mother. "Oh, how quaint," Liz had said, looking around Rose's living room with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore designer clothes that probably cost more than Rose's monthly salary and kept checking her expensive watch during their brief conversation. "We won't be staying long, of course. This is just temporary until we find something in the better part of town." Rose had tried not to take offense. Maybe Liz was just stressed from the move. But as weeks passed, Liz quickly became known throughout the neighborhood as that Karen next door. She complained about everything: the Patel's basketball noise, Mr. Wilson's beagle barking, the height of Mrs. Chen's hedges. She'd called the city inspector twice about minor code violations that nobody had ever cared about before. "Just ignore her," Tanya advised during their walks. "Some people are never happy no matter where they live." Rose tried to follow that advice, focusing on her garden and her quiet life with Buddy. She waved politely when she saw Liz but kept her distance. Live and let live, that had always been Rose's motto. Then one evening, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Rose noticed something odd while watering her vegetables. Footprints, fresh ones, cutting a path right through her tomato bed. And 3 of her ripest tomatoes, the ones she'd been watching carefully, planning to pick tomorrow, were gone. Buddy growled softly beside her, his eyes fixed on the fence that separated her yard from Liz's house. Rose frowned, a strange feeling settling in her stomach. Something told her this was just the beginning of her troubles. The missing tomatoes bothered Rose more than she wanted to admit. It wasn't about the vegetables themselves. She happily gave those away to neighbors all the time. It was the footprints cutting straight through her carefully planted beds, the feeling that someone had walked into her private space without asking. "You think I'm being silly, don't you?" she asked Buddy as she knelt in the soil, pressing it back into place around her damaged plants. The dog just tilted his head, always a good listener. The next morning, Rose decided to check her other plants. To her dismay, a corner of her zucchini patch was trampled, and her favorite purple dahlias had been snipped clean off their stems. This wasn't random damage from a wild animal. Someone had deliberately walked through her garden and helped themselves. Rose wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. Maybe neighborhood kids were cutting through, or perhaps someone had mistaken her garden for community property. At the library where she worked, Miss Gloria, her 70-year-old co-worker with a no-nonsense attitude, had other ideas. Set up a camera, Gloria said during their lunch break, crunching into her apple. My nephew got me one for Christmas after those porch pirates took my packages. Easy as pie to install. That evening, Rose ordered an inexpensive security camera online. She felt a bit silly. Wasn't this an overreaction? But 3 days later, when the package arrived, she carefully mounted it on her back porch, angling it toward the garden. For 2 days, nothing happened. Rose almost forgot about the camera until her phone buzzed with an alert while she was shelving books in the mystery section at work. Hands shaking slightly, she opened the notification. The footage was clear as day. Liz from next door, in her designer workout clothes, cutting straight through Rose's garden. She paused at the tomato plants, looked around quickly, and plucked 2 ripe ones, tucking them into her pocket. On her way out, she casually snipped a few sunflowers with small scissors she pulled from her jacket. Rose watched the video 3 times, a knot forming in her stomach. Her fingers hovered over the phone, wondering if she should call someone. But who? The police would laugh at her for reporting stolen tomatoes. And confronting Liz seemed uncomfortable. Just talk to her, Tanya advised when Rose showed her the video that evening. Maybe she doesn't realize it's a problem. Rose spent the whole next day rehearsing what she'd say. She wasn't good with confrontation. She'd always been the peacekeeper in her family, the one who smoothed things over when voices got raised. But these were her tomatoes, her garden, her private space. She waited until she saw Liz returning from her evening power walk, her blonde ponytail swinging as she strutted up the street. "Excuse me, Liz," Rose called, stepping out onto her front porch. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure her neighbor could hear it. Liz turned, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Yes? Rose, right?" "I noticed someone's been walking through my backyard," Rose said, proud that her voice stayed steady, "and taking some vegetables and flowers. I set up a camera and, well, it was you." Liz's smile didn't falter, but something flashed in her eyes. Not embarrassment or shame. Annoyance. "Oh, that?" She waved her hand dismissively. "It's just a shortcut to the community pool. Those bushes on the corner make the sidewalk route so much longer." "But my garden." And honestly, Liz continued as if Rose hadn't spoken, no one really uses that side yard anyway. It's basically just sitting there. Those tomatoes would have rotted if I hadn't picked them. Rose stood speechless, clutching the porch railing. The tomatoes she carefully tended every day. The garden she'd worked on for 5 years. "I don't mind sharing vegetables," Rose finally said, finding her voice. "But I'd appreciate if you ask first, and maybe use the path instead of walking through the beds." Liz checked her watch. "Listen, I'm late for my son's soccer thing. It's really not a big deal, just a few vegetables." She turned and walked away, calling over her shoulder, "See you around, neighbor." Rose watched her go, a strange feeling settling in her chest. She'd always believed people were reasonable, that they'd respect each other's boundaries when asked politely. Now she wasn't so sure. That night, she found 2 more sets of footprints in her garden. 2 weeks passed, and Rose tried to convince herself that the problem would go away. Maybe Liz had gotten the message, even if she hadn't seemed very receptive. But deep down, Rose knew better. It was Sunday morning, Rose's favorite time to work in her garden. The air was still cool, birds were singing, and the neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of Mr. Wilson's lawnmower. Rose had just settled on her knees to weed around her pepper plants when she heard voices. "See? I told you it's fine. Nobody cares." Rose looked up to see Liz standing at the edge of her yard with 2 other women in matching yoga outfits, gesturing toward the shortcut through Rose's garden. "But isn't this someone's yard?" one of the women asked, looking uncertain. "Oh, it's just Rose," Liz replied with a laugh, not noticing that Rose was right there listening. "She's harmless. Come on, we'll be late for class." Before Rose could say a word, the 3 women were walking straight through her vegetable beds, their expensive sneakers crushing her newly planted lettuce seedlings. Liz gave a little wave when she finally noticed Rose kneeling there, as if they were sharing some friendly understanding. That evening, Rose installed a simple latch on her back gate. Nothing fancy, just enough to send a message. She felt guilty doing it, like she was being unfriendly, but Miss Gloria's words kept running through her head. Fences make good neighbors, honey. The latch worked for exactly 3 days. On Thursday, Rose came home from the library to find her gate standing wide open. Buddy, who usually stayed in the backyard while she was at work, was nowhere to be seen. Panic seized her chest. "Buddy," she called, rushing through the house and out the front door. "Buddy, where are you?" For an hour, Rose searched the neighborhood, calling his name until her voice grew hoarse. Finally, Mrs. Chen's grandson came out of their house holding Buddy's leash. "Found him in the park," the boy explained. "Grandma recognized him from your yard." Rose hugged her dog, fighting back tears of relief. "Thank you so much. My gate was open when I got home." Mrs. Chen, who had followed her grandson outside, frowned. "I saw that neighbor lady, the loud one, go through your yard around noon with her friends. They were carrying pool floats." The next day, Rose bought a proper lock for her gate and posted a small "Please keep gate closed" sign. She also took a day off work to plant new lettuce seedlings to replace the trampled ones. While she was planting, her phone pinged with a text message from an unknown number. "Hi Rose, it's Liz from next door. What's with the lock on your gate? My friends and I need to get through to the pool. Can you text me the code? Thanks." Rose stared at her phone in disbelief. No apology for Buddy getting out. No acknowledgement that she was trespassing on private property. Just an expectation that Rose would accommodate her. After careful thought, Rose typed back, "Hi Liz. I'm not comfortable sharing the code. Buddy got out when the gate was left open. Please use the sidewalk route to the pool." The response came almost immediately. "That adds 5 minutes to our walk. We've been using this way all summer. You never minded before." Rose didn't reply. What could she say? She had minded. She had said so clearly. The following week, things got worse. Rose's security camera caught Liz and her teenage son trying different combinations on the lock. Later, she found her garden hose unraveled and mud tracked all over her patio. One morning, she woke up to find 3 teenage boys she didn't recognize using her sprinkler to cool off, music blaring from a portable speaker. "Your mom said it was cool," one of them called when Rose came outside in her bathrobe. At the neighborhood cookout that weekend, Rose overheard snippets of conversation, becoming so unfriendly and suddenly acting so territorial, and "it's just a shortcut, what's the big deal?" Rose sat alone at a picnic table, picking at her food. Had she really changed, or was it the neighborhood? She'd always thought of herself as easygoing, generous with her garden and her friendship. Now she felt like the bad guy for simply wanting people to respect her property. That night, she added a second lock to her gate. Rose had been planning her summer harvest party for months. It was a small tradition she'd started 3 years ago, inviting a handful of neighbors and friends to celebrate the bounty of her garden. She spent days preparing her famous tomato salsa, zucchini bread, and cucumber salad, all made with vegetables she'd grown herself. "You still having your little party?" Miss Gloria asked as they sorted returned books at the library. "Even with everything going on?" Rose nodded firmly. "I'm not letting one difficult neighbor ruin something I love." The morning of the party, Rose woke up early to hang string lights around her patio and set up the folding tables she'd borrowed from Mrs. Chen. Buddy followed her around, tail wagging as she arranged chairs and laid out her best tablecloth, the one with hand-embroidered sunflowers that had belonged to her grandmother. By noon, everything was perfect. The weather cooperated with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze. Mrs. Chen arrived first, carrying homemade dumplings. Then came the Patel family, their twins immediately running off to throw a ball for Buddy. Tanya brought her famous lemonade, and Mr. Wilson surprised everyone by showing up with his guitar. "Haven't played in years," he admitted shyly, but thought it might be nice. For the first time in weeks, Rose felt herself truly relaxing. This was what she loved about her home, her garden, her little corner of the world, sharing it with people who appreciated it. As Mr. Wilson strummed a gentle tune and the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of her apple tray, Rose thought that maybe, just maybe, the whole situation with Liz would blow over. She was in the middle of explaining to Mrs. Chen's grandson how to tell when tomatoes were perfectly ripe when she heard the unmistakable sound of her back gate rattling. "Weird, it's locked," came a voice from beyond the fence. She must have changed the code again. Just go over it, replied another voice that Rose immediately recognized as Liz's. The party's probably in the front yard anyway. Before Rose could react, there was a scraping sound, and suddenly Liz's head appeared above the fence. She hoisted herself up and over, landing with a thud on Rose's flower bed. 2 other women and a man followed, all dressed in swimsuits with towels around their necks. The party fell silent. Mr. Wilson's guitar strumming stopped mid-chord. Mrs. Chen's grandson froze with a cherry tomato halfway to his mouth. "Hoops," Liz laughed, brushing dirt from her designer swimsuit. "Didn't realize you had company, Rose. Don't mind us just cutting through to the pool." Rose stood rooted to the spot, watching as Liz and her friends trampled across her carefully tended garden, crushing plants under their flip-flops. One of the women bumped the table as she passed, causing Tanya's lemonade to spill across Rose's grandmother's tablecloth. "Sorry about that," the woman called, not slowing down. Rose found her voice at last. "Liz, please, I'm having a party. Could you use the sidewalk just for today?" Liz turned, placing her hands on her hips. "Really, Rose? We've been over this. It adds 5 whole minutes to our walk. Besides," she added with a dismissive wave toward the trampled plants, "there's clearly a path here. I've been using it all summer." "Because you made it by trespassing," Rose said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. "Trespassing? That's a bit dramatic." Liz rolled her eyes for the benefit of her friends. "This is ridiculous. There's a precedent of use here. I've been walking this way for months. You can't suddenly decide to block access to a path that's been established." The entire party was watching now. Rose felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and something else. Anger. Pure, justifiable anger that had been building for weeks. "That's not how property law works," Mr. Wilson spoke up unexpectedly. "Retired lawyer," he added when Liz glared at him. "Whatever," Liz said. "We're already late. Come on, guys." As they continued their shortcut through the yard, Rose watched her beautiful party atmosphere crumble. Mrs. Chen was whispering to her grandson. The Patel twins had stopped playing with Buddy and were staring wide-eyed at the adults. Tanya was desperately trying to blot the spreading stain on the heirloom tablecloth. Something snapped inside Rose. This wasn't just about tomatoes or flowers anymore. This was about respect. About standing up for herself. About reclaiming her space. That evening, after her guests had gone home, with awkward goodbyes and sympathetic glances, Rose sat alone on her patio. The street lights twinkled above her head as darkness fell, but the magic of the day was long gone. "Enough is enough," she whispered to Buddy, who laid his head on her lap. Just enough. Rose couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Liz climbing over her fence, heard her dismissive voice, felt the humiliation all over again. Buddy snored softly at the foot of her bed, unaware of his owner's turmoil. Around 3 a.m., Rose gave up on sleep and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she typed, "Neighbor trespassing on property, what can I do?" The search results were overwhelming. Forums filled with similar stories, legal websites with complicated terminology, heated debates about property rights. Rose rubbed her tired eyes but kept reading. She learned about trespassing laws in her state, about easements, which definitely didn't apply to Liz's situation, and about the rights she had as a homeowner. She was still at her kitchen table, surrounded by notes, and with her 3rd cup of tea growing cold, when the sun came up. "You look awful," Miss Gloria said bluntly when Rose shuffled into the library later that morning. "What happened?" Rose told her everything, the party disaster, her sleepless night, her research. "My nephew Pete is a lawyer," Gloria said when Rose finished. "Not the fancy kind in the glass office buildings downtown. He helps regular folks with everyday problems. Want me to give him a call?" 2 days later, Rose sat nervously in a small office above the hardware store on Main Street. Pete was nothing like she'd imagined a lawyer would be. Instead of a suit, he wore jeans and a faded plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His office had mismatched furniture and fishing photos on the walls. "Aunt Gloria filled me in," he said, offering Rose coffee in a mug that read, "Fishing is my therapy. But I'd like to hear it from you." For nearly an hour, Rose talked while Pete listened and occasionally jotted notes on a yellow legal pad. She showed him the security camera footage on her phone, the texts from Liz, photos of the trampled garden. Well, Pete said finally, leaning back in his chair, the good news is the law's pretty clear here. No matter what this Liz person says about established pathways or precedent of use, she has absolutely no right to cross your property. So what can I do? Rose asked, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Several things, Pete said, counting off on his fingers. First, documentation. Sounds like you're already doing that with the camera footage. That's good. Keep that up. Second, a formal cease and desist letter. I can draft that for you, as a favor to Aunt Gloria. He added with a smile when Rose started to protest about his fee. What's a cease and desist letter? Rose asked. Basically, it's an official warning that says stop trespassing or I'll take legal action. Most people back off once they get one of these. They realize you're serious and that the law isn't on their side. Rose nodded slowly. And if she doesn't stop? Pete's expression grew more serious. Then we go to the police with your evidence and file a formal complaint. But let's try the letter first. Sometimes people like your neighbor just need a reality check. On the way home from Pete's office, Rose stopped at the hardware store. The owner, Joe, had been at her party and seen the whole disaster firsthand. Thinking of building a fortress? He joked when he saw Rose examining the fence displays. Maybe a small one, Rose admitted with a tired smile. With Joe's advice, she filled her cart with supplies, a sturdier lock for her gate, reflective no trespassing signs, and materials to reinforce the weak spots in her existing fence. It cost more than she'd planned to spend, but as she loaded everything into her car, Rose felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: control. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with Buddy at her feet, carefully writing out a plan. First, she'd install the new locks and signs. Then, once Pete's letter was ready, she'd deliver it formally to Liz's house. She'd also make a report at the local police station, just to have it on record. Finally, she'd send a polite note to her other neighbors, explaining that for liability reasons, she needed to enforce the boundaries of her property. On a fresh page in her notebook, Rose wrote in large letters, "My PRPRTE, my rules." For the first time since the footprints had appeared in her garden, she slept soundly through the night. Rose took the next day off work, telling her boss she had home repairs to handle. It wasn't far from the truth. By 8 in the morning, she was already in her backyard, Buddy watching curiously as she laid out her supplies on the patio table. "This is it, boy," she said, scratching behind his ears. "Operation Take Back Our Yard." She started with the existing fence. Using the materials from Joe's hardware store, she reinforced the weak spots where the wood had begun to rot. It wasn't fancy work. Rose was no carpenter, but it was solid. Next came the no trespassing signs, which she placed at 10-foot intervals along the fence. The bright red lettering felt almost aggressive to Rose, who had always prided herself on being welcoming, but she reminded herself that good fences make good neighbors. The new lock on the gate was the most complicated part. Rose had to remove the old one completely, which meant figuring out how to use the electric drill she'd borrowed from Mr. Wilson. Need a hand? Rose looked up to find Mr. Wilson himself standing on the other side of the fence, his ancient beagle sniffing curiously at Buddy through the slats. "I'm making a mess of this, aren't I?" Rose admitted. "Nah," Mr. Wilson said, coming through the front yard to join her. "Just needs an extra pair of hands to hold it steady." With Mr. Wilson's help, the lock was installed in no time. He even helped her test it, making sure it latched properly. "Heard what happened at your party," he said as they packed up the tools. "Whole neighborhood's talking about it." Rose's stomach tightened. "Let me guess. They think I'm being difficult." "Actually," Mr. Wilson said, "most folks are on your side. That Liz woman's been stepping on toes all over the neighborhood. The Patels got a noise complaint when their kids were practicing basketball at 4 p.m. on a Saturday. And Mrs. Chen told me Liz reported her to the city for her unsightly rose bushes." Rose felt a wave of relief. Maybe she wasn't the bad guy after all. By noon, the physical work was done. Rose's yard was now properly secure, with clear markings about private property. But the harder part was still to come. At 3 p.m., Rose's doorbell rang. It was Pete, Gloria's nephew, holding a manila envelope. "Your cease and desist letter," he said, handing it to her. "All official and legal sounding." Rose opened the envelope and skimmed the document. It was indeed very official-looking, with legal terminology and references to state property laws. At the bottom was Pete's signature, complete with his law office information. "So I just give this to her?" Rose asked. "Yep. Hand-deliver it if possible," Pete advised. "And I'd suggest doing it when there's a witness around. Not because anything bad will happen," he added quickly, seeing Rose's alarmed expression, "but so she can't claim she never received it." Rose nodded, tucking the letter into her purse. "I was also thinking of going to the police station, just to file a report about the trespassing." "Good idea," Pete agreed. "Officer Tom is on duty today. He's a reasonable guy. Mention my name." An hour later, Rose had filed her report with Officer Tom, who took down all the details and made copies of her security footage. He explained that while they wouldn't arrest Liz for trespassing unless the situation escalated, having the report on file would help if things got worse. "Most issues like this get resolved once people realize there are actual consequences," Officer Tom told her. The final step was the hardest. Rose had drafted a short letter to her neighbors, explaining that for liability and safety reasons, she needed to restrict access to her property. She made copies and placed them in envelopes addressed to each house on the street. As the sun began to set, Rose stood on her front porch, the cease and desist letter in one hand and Buddy's leash in the other. Across the street, she could see Liz's house, lights on inside, a luxury SUV in the driveway. "Let's do this," she whispered to Buddy, who wagged his tail supportively. With each step toward Liz's house, Rose felt stronger. This wasn't just about tomatoes or shortcuts anymore. This was about standing up for herself, about setting boundaries, about respect. She rang the doorbell and waited, heart pounding but resolve firm. The front door swung open, and Rose found herself face to face with Liz's husband, Mike. Rose said, momentarily thrown off. "Is Liz home?" Mike eyed Buddy warily, then called over his shoulder, "Honey, the neighbor's here." A moment later, Liz appeared behind him, her expression shifting quickly from curiosity to irritation when she recognized Rose. "If this is about the shortcut again," she began. "Actually," Rose interrupted, surprised at her own confidence, "I have something for you." She handed over the envelope containing the cease and desist letter. "This is a formal legal notice asking you to stop trespassing on my property." Liz's eyebrows shot up as she opened the envelope. "Are you serious right now?" she scoffed, skimming the document. "Very serious," Rose replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've also filed a report with the police and installed security cameras that will alert me if anyone enters my yard without permission." Mike, who had been reading the letter over his wife's shoulder, looked uncomfortable. "Liz, maybe we should." "No," Liz cut him off. "This is ridiculous. It's just a shortcut. I'm not hurting anything. You've damaged my garden, left my gate open causing my dog to escape, and trespassed repeatedly despite my requests to stop," Rose said. "I've tried to handle this politely, but you've left me no choice." Liz crumpled the letter in her hand. "We'll see about this." She slammed the door in Rose's face. Walking home, Rose felt strangely calm. She'd done what she needed to do. The rest was up to Liz. The weekend passed quietly. Rose spent it working in her garden, replanting areas that had been trampled and adding a few new flowers. Her security camera sent no alerts. Maybe, just maybe, the letter had worked. Sunday evening, as the sun was setting, Rose was watering her new plants when her phone buzzed with a security alert. She checked the screen and felt her stomach drop. The camera had caught movement near her back fence. Hurrying outside, she arrived just in time to see Liz attempting to climb over her fence. Liz was dressed in an expensive tennis outfit that was clearly not designed for fence climbing. One leg was already hooked over the top, and she was struggling to pull herself up. "What are you doing?" Rose called out, unable to believe what she was seeing. Liz froze, then glared down at her. "Your stupid letter doesn't scare me. There's no way you'd actually sue over something so petty. I've got tennis lessons at the club, and I'm not walking all the way around just because you suddenly decided to be difficult." "I've called the police," Rose said, holding up her phone, which was indeed connected to 911. "They're on their way." "Go ahead," Liz scoffed. "I'll just tell them about how you've let everyone use this path for months. Established use, remember? Rose put the phone on speaker so Liz could hear the dispatcher asking for details. Yes, there's someone trespassing on my property right now, Rose explained calmly. She's attempting to climb my fence despite receiving a legal cease and desist letter yesterday. Within 10 minutes, a police car pulled up outside. Officer Tom, who had taken Rose's report earlier, walked into the backyard with another officer. By this time, Liz had climbed back down from the fence, but was still standing in Rose's yard, arms crossed defiantly. "Ma'am," Officer Tom addressed Liz, "I understand you've been asked not to enter this property." "It's just a shortcut," Liz insisted. "Everyone uses it." "Actually, that's not accurate," Rose countered. "And even if they did, this is private property." Officer Tom nodded. "She's right, ma'am. The homeowner has the right to decide who can and cannot enter their property. She's filed reports of repeated trespassing and has issued you a formal notice to stay off her property." "This is absurd," Liz sputtered. "You're going to arrest me for taking a shortcut." "We're not arresting you today," the second officer explained. "But this is an official warning. If you trespass again after this warning, you could face fines or charges." Liz's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. Her designer tennis outfit was now smudged with dirt from the fence, and two neighbors had come outside to watch the scene unfold from across the street. "Fine," she snapped. "Keep your stupid yard. It's not like it's anything special anyway." After the police escorted Liz back to her own property and left, Rose sat on her patio with Buddy, feeling drained but relieved. Her phone pinged with a text from Tanya. "Just heard what happened. Wine night at my place tomorrow?" The whole neighborhood is talking. Over the next few weeks, Rose noticed a shift in the atmosphere. When she walked Buddy around the block, neighbors she'd barely spoken to before would wave or stop to chat. Mrs. Chen left a potted orchid on her doorstep with a note saying, "For standing up for yourself." At the monthly book club, 3 different people asked for her tomato growing tips. As for Liz, she avoided Rose completely. Rose occasionally caught her giving dirty looks from across the street, but the trespassing had stopped entirely. Once, Rose spotted Mike in the hardware store, and he gave her an awkward nod that somehow felt like an apology. One evening, as Rose sat in her garden watching the sunset, Buddy sleeping peacefully at her feet, she realized something important. Standing up for herself hadn't made her the neighborhood villain as she'd feared. Instead, it had earned her respect, both from others and, more importantly, from herself. The next spring, her garden grew more beautiful than ever. And this time, every tomato made it to harvest.